Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Voddie Baucham, and we're going to talk about his new book, It's Not Like Being Black: How Sexual Activists Hijacked the Civil Rights Movement. Voddie Baucham is the author of the national bestseller Fault Lines. He's the founding dean and senior lecturer in the School of Divinity at African Christian University in Zambia in Africa. And I'm so delighted to have him on this show. This book really blew my mind. Welcome, Voddie Baucham.
Hey, thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Good to have you on. So, okay, it's not like being black. I read this the other day and I was just I love it. It's powerful. It's much needed in the church right now and in the world. Why this book now, and why is this topic of interest to you?
Yeah, that's a big question there. I started talking about this, and a number of people have alluded to the fact that you can go and find uh, articles that I wrote on this 2008, 2010, 2012, is gay the new black and stuff like that. And it goes back really to Proposition 8
Hmm.
and around that time and before that time, the build up to Proposition 8 in California. That was huge. A lot of people forget the tension around that because everybody thought that California was going to be that important domino to fall, and get gay marriage in California, and then all of a sudden it's Katie bar the door. It's rolling from there, and of course it didn't happen, and people were just frantic because they were like, if we can't win California, we're done. So the Advocate does this, front page article, "Gay is the New Black," and they're basically saying the quiet part out loud that our strategy is we're the next phase in the civil rights movement, you know,
Right.
and how dare this happen in California? And the other thing is, black voters were largely pivotal, in their defeat there. And so it was like, I can't believe black people don't get this of all people. So I was writing about it then, 2010 or 12 or so. I write a proposal for a book by this title. I called it the cousin of this book because it was before Burgerfell.
Mm.
And that book and all the sample chapters that I wrote were about just warning people about, here's what's happened and here's where we're going to go. We're going to get to this same sex marriage thing if we don't wake up. Well, everybody was like, you're catastrophizing and this is nah, nah, nah. And when I sent the proposal in, my literary agent sent the proposal in, it was rejected by all the big Christian publishers. And there's one in particular that he sent from a big Christian publisher. And he said, listen, don't read the rejection as much as look at the time stamps. And the rejection email came like 17 minutes after his email was sent. There's no way they paid any attention to it, right? And so nobody wants to do that. Then a Burgerfeld happens, and all of a sudden, the wheels just fall off. I mean, since 2015, we've gone crazy.
That's
And then
when
the
that's
last,
when homosexual marriage became
yes,
legal in all 50 states.
became legal in all 50 states, no Obergefell. And then the last piece is, all of these um, legal actions against Christians
Hmm.
who have dared to say no. And so all of that, put together, it just brought me to the conclusion that this was time for this. Also, this is kind of a follow up to my last book, Fault Lines.
Yeah.
This is sort of the next phase in the critical social justice movement. So I know it's kind of a long way to answer the question, but all of that
Yeah.
is what brought me to
And
this point.
so explain what do you mean by gay is the new black, and what's why is that bad for this is our world?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because that was the tack that was taken by the gay rights movement, basically to attach this to the civil rights movement. Yes,
I have the book.
very few people have that book,
It's
man.
not in print, and it's you can only get it on eBay. And I someone actually gifted this to me, but yeah. Sorry,
Yes,
go ahead.
yes. No, no, no. Very few people have that book. And so, but that was even later. So even and I quote Bayard Rustin in the book Baird Rustin was one of the spearheads behind the March on Washington. He was one of the leading speech writers for Dr. King. And, later on, he famously said that the new N words are the gays,
Hmm.
right? That basically that's the next front in the civil rights struggle. And so 1950s, 1960s, people are already thinking in this way because they were now thinking not just about, racial stuff, but they were talking about a human rights struggle. They were broadening this. Um, so that book that you held up after the ball, which I spent a lot of time discussing in It's Not Like Being Black, that was 1989.
Right.
So this is the further development of the strategy. But Kirk and Matson were really open and purposeful about aligning, with that gay is the new black kind of strategy. So all of that, bring it up to 2008 with the Advocate and the gay is the new black cover story, and that's kind of how we get here. That was the line of attack.
Yeah, Matson and Kirk. I mean, one of the lines from this book, I can't remember it exactly, but it's like talk about one of their strategies was talk about homosexuality until it's thoroughly tiresome. And also,
Yeah.
be a victim so that
Mm-hmm.
why so that straights will homo haters so that
Yeah.
straights will come to your rescue kind of thing, which has
Yeah.
completely happened, of course.
Well, and the thing about it is the brilliance of their strategy was this is 1989, so we're talking about the height of the AIDS pandemic, right?
Right.
There was this razor's edge moment where, on the one hand, people were looking at homosexuality and the homosexual lifestyle and the homosexual culture, right? The bathhouses in San Francisco and all this sort of thing, and they're saying, this promiscuous, deviant lifestyle is what got us here. Well, on the other side, there were pictures of people who were suffering. There are men who are dying in hospitals and they're not able to go see each other in the hospital. And so Kirk and Matson brilliantly just said, listen, if we play this right, we're the sympathetic figures in all of this, and we can change the way people think about us. And that's the subtitle: How America Will Overcome Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the decade of the 90s. And it's basically, how do we use this to make people sympathize with us?
Yeah. And I mean, everything in this book has come to pass. I mean, it's
You know, you know what I tell people? I tell people, if I give you that book and I don't tell you the date, you would think it was a history of what happened, not a strategy.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the five ideological steps that have been used to turn sinners into sexual mind? Now, this term sexual minority has blossomed over the last, I don't know, 5 years, I think, or maybe more.
Yeah.
But what's disturbing about, well, first of all, there's no such thing as a sexual minority. There's only sexual sin, and biblically speaking. Secondly, this term sexual minority has infiltrated the church. I hear pastors
Yeah.
using this term all the time now, which is very upsetting. So, talk about this idea of sexual minority.
Yeah. So, in order to understand that, you got to understand the flag. So, you got the gay flag. Everybody's familiar with the gay flag. It's the rainbow flag, right? But not the gay flag, but the Pride Progress flag.
Hmm.
That's the one with the chevrons, right, on the left side, and you've got the white, the pink, the baby blue, right, and so we're bringing in the trans and all this sort of stuff. But then you've got a brown and a black chevron. Well, the brown and the black chevron are for brown and black people. Why do you have a brown and a black chevron on the Gay Pride Progress flag? Well, you had that because ideologically, what holds this thing together is not sex at all. I mean, boy, you talk about people with different perspectives. Gay men and lesbians historically have not gotten along. That has not been, this friendship between those two. And then, gays and lesbians have been arguing for a generation. It's biological. They've been trying to do pheromone studies and brain studies and twin studies and all of this to prove that it's the biology. Well, the T's come along and they say biology is meaningless. You know, I mean, how do
I
you get
know.
all these people together, right? Well, you get them together when your position is a critical social justice position. This is neo-Marxism. This is oppressor-oppressed ideology. So the oppressor is the white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied, all the way down to Christian. Christianity is the ideology of the oppressor. So people whose sexual practices don't fall in line with the Christian hegemony, these people are minorities from the standpoint of Christian morality. So the reason you have all of these people together, and the reason you lump the black and brown into that as well, is because this is not about sex. This is about morality writ large, and it's about this oppressor oppressed paradigm. And it's about saying that we are sexual minorities because minorities are the people who are oppressed by the majority. That's what's holding this thing together.
Yeah. And why do you think so? This is so many pastors in evangelical churches and Christian churches. Why are they buying into this kind of ideology, into this idea of sexual minority or queer Christianity?
Yeah, yeah. There's a number of things. Kirk and Matson's strategy, their propaganda strategy is desensitizing, jamming, and conversion. Right. So desensitizing, you alluded to that. Just get the images out there. Right. Oh, just flood the zone with images so people get used to it.
Yeah.
You and I think talked on the phone before, and we were talking about Will and Grace and other shows like that where the homosexual character is the best dressed, wittiest, the conscience of the show or whatever.
Right.
So and you get people used to the images. Then there's jamming. Jamming is when you take a grotesque idea to most people, right? Nazis, skinheads, KKK, all this, and you equate being opposed to homosexuality with being part of these groups,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, people are less likely to be open and upfront with their opposition because they don't want the sting of those labels. So they're jammed, right?
Yeah.
That's why when pastors preach on homosexuality, their sermon dies the death of 1,000 qualifications because they started like they would never start any other sermon. I mean, if you were preaching a sermon on stealing, you don't start it by saying, "Now listen, God loves thieves, and I have friends who are thieves. I have members of my family who are thieves." And we don't, you just wouldn't do that. But when you're talking about homosexuality, that's how every sermon starts now, right?
I
Because
know.
we've been effectively jammed. And because the people in the pews, we know they've been jammed. And then conversion, making people allies, right? So when you've been exposed to this, and when we've all sent our children to the government schools and they've been, indoctrinated with this, it's a perfect storm for not having a robust position against it.
It's funny you mentioned that because that's exactly the thing I was going to quote is the jamming and like my topic is adultery. Before like if this is what a sermon would be like if they talked about adultery. But before I begin, let me state clearly that I love adulterers. Jesus
Yeah,
loves adulterers. I have several friends who are actively engaged in adultery. I think it is important that we make it clear, even though the Bible speaks against adultery, it does not speak against adulterers. Many adulterers have been hurt by the church's harsh rhetoric about adultery. Many adulterers don't want to have anything to do with the church because of our rhetoric, and that is a terrible witness. So
yeah,
I mean, it is funny because I mean, it's sad, really, but whenever I do hear a sermon on homosexuality, it's like the first 75% of the sermon is apologizing for God's word and then saying, okay, by the way, this is a sin. Like, and it's like, what? You don't need to apologize for God's word. It's very clear,
yeah,
and it's for our flourishing and for it's because he loves us. And I didn't realize that until, I got saved 15 years ago. I thought I was flourishing as a gay man in Los Angeles. Little did I know I was just in total bondage. And it wasn't until I came to faith in Christ that I actually really did flourish as a human being. And uh, so yeah, I love that passage in your book. And
yeah,
talk about the lockdowns and the mask mandates. Because you talk about that in the book and vis-a-vis Romans 13.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we learned a lot about the way Christians think about the government. We learned a lot about the way Christians think or don't think, you know, about the government and this idea of the government and its, absolute power and this idea of Christians and our, absolute obligation to, not say anything at all against that absolute power. And it was interesting to watch Christians attack other Christians who dared question the government,
Mm-hmm.
in any way. And I've been saying to people as I've been talking about this that I wish that I had sort of, put this in the book, but this is our Caesar is Lord moment, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and New Testament Christians, the idea that Jesus is Lord was really a rebellion against the mandate to confess that Caesar is Lord, because Caesar's not Lord, right? Jesus is Lord. And our culture now is saying to us in its own way that you have to confess that the government is higher than God. I know that God says marriage is between a man and a woman, but I'm saying to you that it's not. I know that you look over there and you see a man, but you better say that it's a woman and you better use she, her pronouns. In other words, bend the knee. And so many Christians are trying to figure out how to best and most graciously bend the knee to Caesar. Um, and you can't bend the knee enough. Like
Right.
you won't. He'll never be satisfied unless you're confessing that Caesar is Lord.
Yeah. And I mean, how long do you think it will be before, the government is going to basically make it illegal to say that homosexual behavior is a sin from the pulpit?
I don't know, but we've already made it immoral, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a short leap, before you make it illegal. And in some instances, it's already illegal. Um, for example, when you refuse to bake a cake, right?
Yeah, I had Jack
Eh,
Phillips on the show. Yes.
yeah. Or when you refuse to make the dress, for the wedding or whatever. I mean, the government is already coming in and saying, no, you can't do that. Um, when you get fired from your job because you refuse to play the pronoun game or because or whatever, I mean, the government's not on your side there. And if you work in the government, if you are in the military, for example, or if you work, for a government or as a government contractor or whatever, these rules are already in place. It's already happening for people right
Yeah.
now today. It's only a matter of time before, in the church. And by the way, this is why that strategy is so important. Because if being a sexual minority is, the equivalent of, being an ethnic minority, then it stands to reason that it has to be as illegal to say no to marrying the same sex couple as it would be to say no to marrying the
Yeah.
interracial couple. It has to be.
Yeah. It's coming soon. I mean, I can't imagine. It's funny because I listen to while I do the dishes. I listen to audio Bible, and I've read First Corinthians many many times, and I was listening to it a few months ago, and it got to First Corinthians 6, and I was like, wow, I can't believe this is still legal in California. I mean, I can't believe there's like I can actually listen to this on my phone in California. So I don't know how much longer we have.
Listen, I'm sure Gavin's got somebody on that.
I know. I'm scared. I might have to move to Zambia. By the way, what do
Yeah,
people in Zambia think of all of this kind of stuff?
they think we're crazy, man. They, it's crazy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I might be moving to Zambia. Um, so and then you say,
But by the way, here's another point though. People say that the Africans are doing better on this and yada yada. I always tell them two things. Number one, the fifth country in the world, one, two, three, four, five, to legalize same-sex marriage was South Africa.
mhm,
So it's there. The influence is there. The other thing is the UN has much power on the African continent because of pulling the purse strings, right? With shekels
yeah,
come shackles. And so the UN is doing everything it can to leverage its influence on the African continent on these particular issues. And then thirdly, the US in its foreign policy is doing everything it can to leverage its influence. I have in the book the statement that the Biden White House put out after Uganda's law on homosexuality was passed, and it was a not so thinly veiled threat to
yeah.
remove billions in aid if they didn't straighten up and fly right.
How close is Uganda from Zambia? Where how is that?
1,500 miles, maybe. I
Okay.
think if I'm yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty, I mean, the president of Uganda is pretty bold. Um, and so oh, you say you mentioned the book that one of your favorite sayings is if you don't know the purpose of a thing, you're destined to abuse it. What do you mean
Yes.
by that?
Yeah. I mean, like anything, if kids will pick up a whatever, a toy and use it as a hammer. And if you use a toy as a hammer, you're going to break the toy, right? It's like that with anything, with everything. It's like that with marriage. It's like that with sex. If you don't know the purpose of a thing, you're going to abuse the thing. And if we don't know the purpose of marriage, we're going to abuse it. And, one of the things I talk about is, you know, long before we got to Obergefell, um, we started reimagining marriage.
Hmm.
And especially with the sexual revolution, when you get contraceptives, all of a sudden we can divorce sex from childbearing. And if you can divorce sex from childbearing, then you can divorce sex from marriage, right? And then abortion comes along because, contraceptives aren't 100%. So there were still, instances or whatever. But now abortion comes along. So you got a backstop. So you can
Right.
absolutely divorce sex from childbearing. And if you're going to divorce sex from childbearing and sort of reframe marriage writ large, and not every individual marriage, but the very concept of marriage itself, and its place in a society and in a civilization. If you're going to divorce that from childbearing, then all of a sudden it is easy to start imagining all sorts of arrangements that you could make and call them marriage.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read that book, Making Gay Okay by Robert Riley, I think his name is. But he says that
I don't
too.
think I read that one. Yeah.
He says in the book that the pill effectively cut the link between sex and diapers, which
Yeah.
I like
Nice.
that.
Nice.
Um, and so uh, you say in the book that the family is the cornerstone of civilization and the first institution God created. Why is it important to choose how we define marriage and the family in today's society? Well, that's kind of obvious, but what? So how? Because did you see that there was that the on some talking head said something like we don't get our some people think we get our rights from God.
No, yeah, what they referred to Christian nationalists.
Right,
She was talking about Christian nationalists and the defining characteristic of these dangerous Christian nationalists is they think our rights come from God. And I
it's
don't.
like, have
I
you
was like,
read the Constitution?
what? Exactly. Yeah, the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution. I mean, that's who we are, you know. But that sort of goes to my broader point is what we've done now is essentially said that our rights don't come from God, right? That's what you do when you listen. You can't give two men the right to marry any more than you can give a man the right to get pregnant.
Hmm.
Like you, men can't get pregnant, right? Two men can't get married. So what we did was not give men and women the right to enter into same-sex marriages. What we did was we obliterated the definition of marriage itself. And in doing so, we said Caesar is Lord because marriage is antecedent to government. It's antecedent to culture. We had marriage long before we had America. We had marriage long before we had any,
Hmm.
civil government, right? All civil governments inherited marriage as a creation ordinance that we got from God. And so when we did that, we essentially said the state is God and the state can create something out of whole cloth and declare that it is a right. And in doing so, also declare that all bets are off in terms of morality.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was living that lifestyle, and my closest gay friends, we used to talk about gay marriage, and we would say gays don't want to get married. Gay men especially don't want to get married. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole point, is not to be like conventional like the rest of the world. And so it was obviously a political move. It
Yeah.
wasn't actually something that, you know, so it's yeah, they because of Obergefell, it's now it's like we're trapped. Like there's no way out of this, really.
Yeah. See, so before gay marriage, and again, I don't even, it's not, there's no such thing, right? But, you know, but before Bergefell, before there's that declaration, there's this unspoken reality. And the unspoken reality is that Western civilization is built on biblical truth, right? I mean, we know that we used to teach that,
Yeah.
you know, we used to teach that. And now we sort of shun that. And it was there. And Obergefell was basically us cutting the tether between Western civilization and the biblical truth upon which Western civilization is founded. And that was a dangerous move.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the consequence. We're reaping the whirlwind now. Things have gone so far, so fast. It's crazy. We're mutilating children. We're castrating little boys. And we're cutting off the healthy breast tissue of girls. That's what we're doing. And now we have a study that came out last week that tells us that this gender affirming care has resulted in suicide rates that are 12 times higher.
Wow.
They said to us, would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter, right? You got to do this or they'll commit suicide. Now the receipts have come in and suicide rates are 12 times higher. This is National Institutes of Health, by the way. Suicide rates are 12 times higher. Now, do you know what the conclusion of that study was? We need to do a better job in psychiatric follow up.
Mm, yeah.
Not we made a mistake. Not let's put the brakes on. We need to do a better job in psychiatric follow up.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I mean, did you ever think in your lifetime you would see this kind of craziness? Yeah,
No.
I didn't either. This is all bizarre to me. But uh where can people find and by the way, when does this release?
June 4th.
June
It's
4th.
it's yes, it's a Pride Month special. Yes. Yes.
Yes, it's going to be very helpful. And what
Yeah.
so is this mainly for the church or for Christians?
This is for anybody who would dare to read it.
Yeah.
And the question you were going to ask is, where can people find it? And that's a very interesting question because there are a lot of places that don't want to carry it. There are a lot of places that are not going to be carrying it. When Fault Lines came out, Fault Lines debuted at number 7 on several national bestsellers list, right? And a few weeks after, I'm in a bookstore. I'm going to see the book. It's a big national bookstore. We go and we look at the front where all the bestsellers are, and it wasn't there. There are books that were behind fault lines on the bestsellers list that were out there. And then I go in and look in the religion section. I do the alphabetical thing. It's not there. So I go to the desk and I say, "Hey, you guys carry a book called Fault Lines?" Type it in, and they say, "Oh yeah, we've got 2 copies in the back." And I was like, "What? What in the world?" So
Wow.
if that's what happened to Fault Lines, you can only imagine, what's going to happen with It's Not Like Being Black. But people can
But
find it, go order it, go, just go get your copy, write reviews about it, help us get around all of that.
yeah, we'll put a link below for an Amazon link. Um, all right. Well, guys, you've got to get this book. It's Not Like Being Black, How Sexual Activists Hijacked the Civil Rights Movement. I think the church especially really needs to see, because Voddie goes into some detail in one section, some graphic detail about these issues. And I think it's so important for Christians to be aware of what's happening to him, the blind spots that we're unaware of. So, Voddie Baucham, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you so much. And let me say this too. I remember us getting on the phone when I was bogged down in this, and it was so hard to go from that earlier book that I was trying to write to the book that this had to become, post Obergefell. And we just had a wonderful conversation that was just very helpful, in thinking about this whole issue and the importance of it, and the way to help people understand it. And I so appreciate that, and I just want to thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming. Well, have a great day. And yeah, guys, it comes out June 4th. So get your copy now. Thank you for joining us.